I wanted to refurbish a few furniture pieces that I already have for an upcoming move. I have this black cabinet that I have done previous makeovers for, and I wanted to give it a whole new look. I definitely want to go with something a little bit softer. We have been packing non-stop and the moving truck is coming next week. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to redo this cabinet, including an old chair that I have. I purchased some of these WoodUBends and I thought maybe I can do something with this. So I purchased 6 of them and I thought I would add it to the cabinet design. Because the entire cabinet is very squared off and it had a little bit of roundness with the long legs, I thought this might actually make a nice pair, so I'm going to give that a try. So I'm going to soften the cabinet by using French linen chalk paint. And I'm only going to put on 2 thin coats to get a full coverage. I really love the texture that was already previously given to this cabinet on previous makeovers. But changing up your already furniture projects is a great way to redesign a room, or you just want to have a different vibe going on, or you want something to be darker or perhaps lighter. I love the thickness of the chalk paint, and I really don't have to concern myself about having good coverage when I use it. But I really want to create a two-tone to this cabinet, as well as a little bit of an ombre effect. I will go and touch up the black on the top part of the cabinet as well as the legs. The original color of the cabinet is the Athenian black chalk paint, so I'm going to go around and correct the mistakes that I dabbed on with that French linen and just give everything a touch up. Now, to get that contrast between the black and the lighter color, I'm actually just going to use that painter's tape, and I like to paint the lighter color, so this way when I go to touch up that black color, I'll already have a nice straight line. Also want to give the drawer a little fresh update. So now that the French linen on top of the painter's tape is completely dry, I'm going to go and add that touch up of the Athenian black for the top as well as the legs. And this is why I like to have that base color on first, because when I lift that painter's tape off, I'm going to have a nice crisp straight line. If you have paint over your hardware, the Gilding Wax is an excellent choice. That way you can go back and bring it to a metal look again. Or you could just use a little bit of baking soda and water, and you can actually just remove that paint off the hardware. I like the Gilding Wax effect. This way you could actually change it to a little bit of a gold, copper, and in my case I used the dark silver. So I wanted to play around with that ombre effect, and I thought by using these WoodUBends that I'm going to add to the cabinet, this would be a great way to add that ombre by making it an accent piece to the design of the cabinet. So I'm going to put French linen on the top, and I'm also going to put the Athenian black on the bottom. And I've used actually 3 brushes, one for each color, and then I'm going to use a separate brush. This way I can tap the 2 colors in, so this kind of gives that smooth transition between that French linen and black paint. And I kept pretty much just pouncing at it until the transition of the 2 colors kind of collided the way I liked it. The process actually went very, very quickly because these are small accents to the cabinet project, and it was a great way just to practice some painting technique as well. So if this is something that you would like to do in upcycling or redesigning any pieces of furniture that you already have, perhaps maybe you would even like to use some colors. I've used the neutral palettes, but the colors and any choices that you want, all this technique is going to apply to the same to get the same effect. I love the roundness of the lower cabinet legs that it stands on, so I thought by adding these circular WoodUBends would really kind of bring the whole design together. Once I completed all 6 that I created, I'm going to use the No More Nails as well as a little bit of hot glue. This way I have a secured adhesion when I apply it to the cabinet. I like to use an X-Acto knife so that way anything on a glass or a mirror that I've gotten some paint on, it comes right off. I prefer to use this method. I find it just as effective as just using tape. I'm going to measure exactly where I want to put the WoodUBends that I've created with the Ombre, adding my no more nails and just a tiny bit of some hot glue. And again, this is just going to assure as soon as I place it exactly where I want it on the cabinet, it's going to stay in its spot, and it will also have that good adhesion. I purchased an old Victorian chair that I absolutely really love the makeover I did, but my cat Dimitri decided to make it his own chair, which then caused a little bit of damage onto the corners of the fabric. So I'm gonna go and actually give this chair a whole new makeover, and I think it's gonna actually really suit the new house. I'm always browsing around on Pinterest, and I really love what people are doing to old love seats of the Victorian style, as well as these chairs, to kind of give it that deconstructed look. So I'm only going to work with what I have on this chair. So I originally used staples to add the fabric that I have here. So I'm going to take it all off, and I'm going to use what's underneath as my base for the new design. I'm also going to use the base color as the same as I did with the cabinet in the French linen. I was really inspired by the deconstructed look, so I was going to just experiment with working with the fabric that's actually only existing on this chair now. There's quite a few of the nail tacks all around this chair, and they're not really in line to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to thicken up the paint, and I'm going to cover that all up, and I will add a trim, but I want to work with the fabric that's already currently on the chair. And there's also that real horse hair in and around the seating and the back, including the springs. So I don't really want to take that apart. So I thought, why not stain it the same color? And I'm going to use the paint to do that. Unfortunately, there's always that conception by using paint on fabric, it's going to have a stiffness to it. But never think that you're actually painting fabric. What you're doing is you're using the paint to stain the fabric. So you will need a fair amount of water. So I recommend having a spray bottle, and you're going to use tiny, small amounts of paint, and you're going to brush it in with the water all over the fabric. And all it's going to do is just create a rather large stain to cover your surface of fabric, and it still will actually be very soft to the touch. And there's a couple of other things that you can do to make sure that you have a nice soft finish, and I'll show you that in just a minute. This is the same thing as dyeing fabric. You're just using the paint pigment to achieve the same results. The water will really help move the pigment of the paint around, so it's actually very easy to do this and extremely cost effective when you want to create a new design. The key trick that you want to make sure is very tiny amounts of paint. Again, you're not actually painting the fabric, you're dyeing it with the paint pigment. The water's really going to help move, as well as the brush strokes, to move that paint pigment around. And as you can see, it goes on very, very easily. The only thing to consider is that you can't really sit in this chair for a few days, as it will take anywhere from 3 to 7 days depending on how cool or warm your environment is. And in my case, my home is actually quite cool, so by the time I actually finished this chair, it still was not completely dry. So that's where you're still going to see a little bit of streaking because because there's moisture still remaining in the chair. But once it's completely dry, that will eliminate. I still have quite a bit of leftover trim, so I'm going to add that as an embellishment to the chair, and it's also going to cover those nail tacks. I've always wanted to try those grain stack stripes. This was a total experiment as I wasn't really sure if the painter's tape was going to be effective in order to create this. So I decided to use the same method as I did on the cabinet. I'm actually adding the painter's tape, and now I'm putting some French linen paint very, very sparsely over the paint. Now I can go and add my white stripe, and I'm just going to use a paint dauber, and I'm going to be very light, and I'm also going to add some water. And this seemed to rest assured that my paint did not bleed underneath my painter's tape. Because I'm painting a fabric, I was a little insecure if this was actually going to work, but it did. So the trick was to add a little bit of the paint pigment of the base. So I'm going to add a little bit of the white wax to the wood frame of the chair. Then I'm going to add some clear wax to the stained fabric. And this is actually what really kind of softens your fabric when you've used a paint to stain it. It's very helpful to use a small little brush, or you could even use an artist brush to get into all of that detail with your white wax. Using a brush for your white wax also helps for kind of getting an overall evenness with your wax. And this will apply to dark wax, white wax, brown wax, or even a custom color wax. If you're ever adding these detail waxes on top of your painted furniture, you can always use clear wax as an eraser to remove if you feel you've added too much. So for the fabric portion, I'm going to use the clear wax in a lint-free shop towel. And you're just going to add small little bits at a time, and you're going to just go in large circular motions. Basically, you're just adding a little tiny bit of moisture to the fabric, and I did this when it was drying. So I'm still on the same day that I painted it, so it's still going to have some of the streaks of areas being more moist versus areas that aren't as moist. So that's where you're going to see a little bit of that streaking even in the finished result. But that will resolve once the fabric is completely dry. So where all those nail tacks are, I'm just going to add that dark, it's kind of a dark gray trim, just to kind of accent it and just kind of make it a little bit more unified. And again, just adding a little bit more embellishment to the chair. The hot glue, there is also fabric friendly, and it's actually the Gorilla hot glue. I have it in the description box below. I usually put my hot glue on half setting when I work with fabric, so this just makes it a little bit safer and easier to work with when I'm working with materials and hot glue. The chair will need a few more days to dry, and Dimitri, my cat, he's gonna have to have a new chair to play with. Thank you so much for watching this week's video, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you soon. Until then, take care.